Welcome to Melt. I'm Suresh Venkat. Last week, media agency Wavemaker India released the Spotlight 23 report, a paper that captures 23 strategic focus areas across big tech platforms and emerging technologies that marketers should take note of this year. To know more, we'll be in conversation today with Vishal Jacob, Chief Transformation and Digital Officer at Wavemaker India, who joins us from Bangalore. What are the disruptive technologies that are likely to impact the business of marketing? Let's find out as we get ready to melt with Vishal Jacob. All right, Vishal, let's start with the first question. What was the need for a report like Spotlight 23, especially from a media agency like yours?
Yeah. So Suresh, if you look at the advertising spends today, right, one out of every $3 is happening currently on a digital platform. So very soon, essentially, that out of every $3 being spent, $1 being spent on digital, that might become a ratio of 1:1. And if that increases, then essentially the way to win on digital is something that a lot of clients have been raising questions on. When it comes to digital, essentially it's not a game of just share of voice, right? It's about building a strong experience. So if you look at the consumers and how they react across multiple touch points, building a superlative experience across every single touch point essentially becomes extremely critical. And to do that, essentially, there are two key elements, right? One is your ability to understand consumers across each of these touch points, which essentially means the amount of data that you currently sit on your customers. And secondly, how well you leverage that data through a robust set of technology. So today, if you look at it, there's a huge overlap between marketing and technology, and this overlap is actually becoming bigger and bigger. So, a lot of the conversations that we're currently having with CMOs, a lot of the conversations actually revolve around technology to a good extent, and that's becoming a very pivotal, a part of the overall discussion on marketing today. If you look at it, there aren't too many reports that actually focuses on this, and we want to be the reference point on this. And that's why if you look at our report, essentially it really talks about the various we put a spotlight essentially on 23 areas, largely around technology and digital big tech platforms essentially. And that's why we felt a report of this nature was necessary for us.
All right, Vishal, let's dive right into the report. Your report is exhaustive, 23 different trends segregated into 7 sections. Let's start off with one of them: big tech platforms and connected TVs. Now, given the popularity of the TV medium, marketers love television. Is the smart TV likely to be the game changer for the Indian marketer?
Yes, it is, and I think it's going to be a big game changer. Not just over here. Even if you look at the trends in the West, we're following a similar pattern, right? So today we currently have about 22 million, 22 to 20, 24 million approximately, the number of connected TV users in the country, and this is expected to go 2 times in 2025. The reasons for that, obviously, if you look at the market today, all the television sets that are coming out essentially are all smart TVs. You don't get a non-smart TV or a dumb TV rather, right? So, or a linear TV. And as a result of which, the adoption that you're going to see, is going to be a lot more, content which is not going to be on demand. And the implications of this, of course, is that when you look at advertising as such, right, you were reaching out to the way of advertising through linear TV, largely broadcast medium. You have an ability to kind of personalize communication to a good extent. So I think that will change to quite an extent. So we've got cheaper internet connections. We've got a plethora of content that's out there. We've got devices becoming a lot more cheaper. So all this is going to culminate into a lot of people getting behind smart TV, and therefore the way one would need to personalize communication on television might change. And I think that's going to be the big disruptor that we're going to be seeing. The creative ways of engaging users on television might be a game changer.
All right, let's move from television to the mobile. Now, the popularity of reels and short form video content. We are seeing an obsession with reels on all sorts of platforms. Do you think this is a passing fad or a permanent fixture?
No, I think it's going to be a permanent fixture. I mean, nothing is really permanent in this world, but if you watched a movie in recent times, you'd know that a long format movie essentially has got a lot of emotions packed into it. What Reels has essentially done is that, in a span of 15 seconds, 20 seconds, there is a certain kind of emotion that each of these Reels evoke. Right, so it's very addictive in nature. So you watch one video and then you're watching something, perhaps on gaming, and then that evokes a certain kind of emotion. And then you watch something else, which probably is, of a certain different passion, but maybe around music, and that evokes something else. And you watch a dance video and that evokes something else. So in a span of 15 to 20 minutes, you've packed about 15 to 20 different types of. It's an emotional overload, if I may say so. And as a result of which, the reels and short format videos have become extremely addictive to a lot of people within the country. For a marketer's lens, if you look at it from that lens, essentially, it's if I were to draw a quadrant in terms of high reach and high impact, reels is right up there. There's a lot of consumers moving in there. Therefore, you're able to reach out to consumers a lot more at a relatively cheaper cost, essentially. But the challenge is then how do you kind of come with communication or advertising formats, essentially, which are far more engaging in nature, because it's easy to get lost and extremely difficult to hold attention when a person is highly addicted to a certain kind of content, right? So that's been the challenge that we're facing right now. So we've got a lot of consumers, we've got a lot of people engaging in this content, but getting advertising to work in a very impactful way in short format videos, that's the challenge that a lot of people are trying to solve for right now.
So, what's your advice to marketers who are trying to craft a short form video strategy for their brand?
I think the strategy would differ from platform to platform, right? And really understand the nuances. How do you gain a person's attention in the first 3 or 4 seconds, right? How can you make the content a lot more provocative in nature? How can you ensure that the brand is visible in the first 3 to 4 seconds from a layout perspective? I think Facebook put it really well in the earlier days. How do you create a thumb-stopping creative? Right? To me, that's the crux of it all. When you look at creating content, I think the earlier ways of doing about it essentially was there would be a big idea, and that big idea would translate into smaller ideas or smaller formats, essentially. I think the time now is to look at each platform and think about how you're going to be leveraging that platform with that specific format. I think that's the difference that marketers and brands should look at, essentially.
Now, let's talk about cookies, the kind that services plant on your devices. Are brands ready to move to what's called a cookie-less world?
Yeah, I think at this point in time, I don't think a lot of brands are ready for that. But I think the time frame that's given essentially is the end of 2024. I think there are 2, 3 parts to this, essentially. One part is basically getting ready for the cookieless world, and the end state of what are the various solutions that one would need to look at, essentially, is not really clear right now. So if you look at it today, right now, the third-party cookies really are a means through which one can understand consumers, means through which one can measure the effectiveness of campaigns, means through which one can create frequency caps, means through which you can measure the reach of a campaign, and so on and so forth. So if that's going to get replaced by another option, the other option essentially is not very clear, and it might not be necessarily one option, right? It could be possibly 4 or 5 different types of options solving for different types of problems. So for a brand to be ready for the cookieless world, one might need to test and learn and see what's working for each of them across each of these options that would be available, whether it's a universal ID or whether it's contextual advertising and so on and so forth. So as of now, I don't think all the brands have tested and have a good set of learnings to deploy. But I think that will happen over a period of time. I think we have time, and we're encouraging at Wavemaker, at least we're trying to create an audit tool to kind of help our brands understand what are the potential impact across various parameters. How can one navigate to a solution in each of those impacts? So that's the way we're trying to help our brands. And some of them have already embarked on this journey, but a lot of brands still need to.
So let me flip the question around. Is Wavemaker ready for a cookieless world?
Yes, we are. Like I said, so we've got I think we were the first ones to have come up with a third-party audit tool, which will give you a sense in terms of what is the potential impact that a cookieless world would have on brands. And the implication of that, therefore, is something that we have very clearly articulated to all of our clients.
Let's now move to e-commerce. And you cannot talk about e-commerce today without using that 4-letter word ONDC, Open Network for Digital Commerce.
Right.
And how is ONDC likely to impact e-commerce?
Yeah. So ONDC is an open network, right? Essentially, simply put, there are buyers and then there are sellers. What ONDC essentially does is to try and bring buyers and sellers on a single platform to engage with each other. If you look at it from a seller's point of view, any mom and pop shop today can actually get onto an e-commerce platform without too much of a trouble, and really not being dictated by an Amazon or the terms of what an Amazon has or Flipkart has, essentially, right? So you obviously can become e-commerce ready with not too much difficulty. So that's the supplier side, right? So anyone across the country, and that's the intent of ONDC to help all stores across the country to become e-commerce ready. From a buyer side, essentially, consumers like you and me, for instance, will have a lot of options to look at within a certain pin code itself. So within one pin code, I can use one app and then figure out multiple options that I can go to. So the impact of that, essentially, I think for brands to a large extent, is that they'll have a lot more options. I think it's going to be a lot more competitive, right? So, for instance, if I'm selling a brand, and right now, if it's going to be a duopoly between Amazon, Flipkart, or for that matter, if I look at on the food side, it's going to be Swiggy or Zomato or Uber and Ola. I think once this opens up, then it gives a platform for a lot of budding entrepreneurs and small scale industries to kind of rise, right? That's the big opportunity, and I think it'll probably grow the e-commerce industry and create a level playing field for everyone on the supplier side. On the buyer side, obviously, there's a huge advantage for consumers like us. We'll have a lot more, I think, because due to the stiff competition, I think it'll be a lot more. We'll have a lot more options to play with in terms of where to buy. We can probably choose a store which is very close to me and have that product delivered rather than looking at a product on Amazon and getting it delivered in 4 to 5 days, right? So those are some of the advantages that I see both from a consumer side as well as a buyer side.
Okay, Vishal, if you were the CEO of one of those duopoly companies that you talked about, Amazon, Flipkart, Swiggy, Zomato, how would you prepare for ONDC?
See, I think the biggest differentiator, Suresh, over here is going to be the loyalty that one can bring to the table. The only thing that can probably be a differentiator over here essentially is the experience that you provide to a consumer and the loyalty programs that you can actually create. So I would be holding on to consumer data. I will be trying to understand each of my consumers, their needs, essentially trying to create a superlative experience, because that superlative experience is the only reason why a person will want to stay back and drive further transactions with me.
Your report also talks about social commerce, and you say it will continue to grow, and the technologies like VR, AR, and XR, extended reality, will help create more immersive shopping experience. Do you think this is likely to be an urban-only phenomenon, or will it percolate down to the rural areas as well?
Let's take a step back and just understand the social media ecosystem for a while, right? So, if you look at the social commerce world, essentially, when we started off, the social commerce understanding essentially was only limited to inventory that you'll get on social platforms through which you could actually drive commerce. But over a period of time, essentially, what happened is, there are a lot of other opportunities that came across social platforms. There was live commerce that, social platforms started. They started promoting influencers who could sell products and so on and so forth. There was conversational commerce. They came up with bots around which you can help people discover products and so on and so forth. Right. So there's conversational commerce, live commerce, influencer commerce, whatever you call it. Essentially, all that became a gamut of social commerce right now. In India, there are a couple of things that are not necessarily taken off like it's taken off in APAC. Right? So, for instance, live commerce hasn't really taken off. Even if you look at conversational commerce, it could be a lot more better, essentially. So those are some of the areas that one needs to get better at. There is a potential for everyone to grow over here. But the problem that most of the brands are essentially trying to solve is how do I collapse the funnel and improve the speed at which I drive a person from awareness to actual purchase. And that's where social commerce becomes a lot more effective. Now, AR and extended reality and VR essentially are some of those means to the end. And the end over here is sales, right? How do I collapse the funnel and drive a faster conversion rate between awareness to actual purchase. I don't really know whether it's going to be an urban phenomenon or it could be rural, because this is going to be a format nonetheless. Right? Tomorrow, a share chat which is focusing heavily on not the urban market but more on the Bharat of India, as they call it, essentially, could also use AR and VR and leverage ways in which brands can use that to kind of drive a certain kind of messaging to each of its consumers. So I don't think it'd be fair to say there's going to be only an urban consumer, way of reaching urban consumers. But I think it could be something that a lot of brands can use to reach consumers across the country.
The last few years have obviously seen a dramatic explosion in digital payments, and I won't go into that. But my question to you is this: will the introduction of the CBDC or the digital rupee, how will that impact brands and marketers?
Well, it'll impact consumers first, and anything that impact consumers obviously will impact brands and marketers as such, right? So, where consumers today might not necessarily need to go to a physical bank to open an account because they can directly engage with the central government, right? So, and for the government also, they don't necessarily need to route some of the schemes through banks as such. They can have a direct way of putting money into a person's account if they have a smartphone and if they have a way to use it, essentially. So I think financial inclusion is something that the CBDC is essentially trying to solve, and therefore a lot of brands who are not necessarily able to penetrate into certain rural markets essentially will have an ability to do so to a good extent, right? I think that's where a game changer could possibly be. And of course, there are other aspects also. For instance, in the way you do your D2C kind of platforms, you can use CBDC as one of the ways in which you can drive payment and so on and so forth. But I think the bigger point to note over here essentially the financial inclusion that you could probably reach out to consumers, which you can't necessarily do today.
Will it be significantly different from using Paytm or any of the wallets as far as the consumer is concerned?
I don't think so. Not necessarily from a user experience standpoint. I think if you have money, whether it's on your a certain bank account or whether you have it on a different wallet, I think the difference over here could possibly mean that if you have an e-wallet, essentially, you could probably and obviously with Web 3.0 coming on board, the way you kind of connect to each of these decentralized apps essentially could be a game changer. So that could possibly be a big difference compared to a Paytm, which is more centralized to a specific bank, right? And some of the banks might not necessarily want to, kind of engage on a Web 3.0 platform. Over here, if you're probably connected to an e-wallet, which is connected to a decentralized platform, the chances are that you could probably have access to some of those platforms which you might not necessarily have. But from a pure user experience, if you're going to a Kirana store and doing a transaction over there, I don't think there'll be much of a difference in that front.
Let's talk about Web 3.0 then. Have we reached the peak hype point for Web 3.0 and Metaverse?
From a lens of hype, I think we kind of, I think if for any trend that you actually see, right, there is always going to be a hype. And then it comes down and then it plateaus until it reaches a certain maturity
Classic
point. Right?
Gartner hype cycle, yeah.
Yeah. So I think a lot of the brands and marketers got excited, when on more than Web3, I think they got more excited on the metaverse conversations because Facebook changed its name to Meta, and I think that was a tipping point around which all the conversations around the metaverse really took off. Right. So to me, I think we've crossed that phase and we've come down to a phase of reality right now. And I think the reality shows good promise, right? So if you look at Web3 specifically, I think there is the number of developers who are currently on Web3 trying to build applications on decentralized platforms. I think that has increased, even though the hype has come down, right? And that shows promise essentially. And one also needs to understand that the Web3 phenomenon is, or rather, Web3 philosophy essentially was built on the entire piece around decentralization, right? So I think that there are a lot of takers for that. I think there is a need for having privacy compliant environments. There is a need for having, for the of decentralization. There is a need for having, inclusion. For all those promises that Web3 actually has, the promises people really want to see that fulfilled. But the time that's taken to do that, I think, might take a little bit more longer because the user experience right now on Web3 platforms needs to improve a lot. So I think that's the big gap that needs to be built. How do you improve the user experience across each of these platforms that are currently there? And therefore, I think we'll see a takeoff once that's fixed.
Now let's talk about Web3 and Metaverse's close cousin, which is generative AI.
Yeah.
Right? The big elephant in the room. Sir Martin Sorrell seems to think that services like ChatGPT can replace a media agency. So Vishal, will you be out of a job soon?
I hope not. I've spent my entire life in the advertising world, and if I would hate to believe that it could replace us. I'll tell you more seriously. Essentially, the way we are seeing it, it will really add to the productivity of an advertising professional, right? So from a design perspective, to drive inspiration, you'll find generative AI and platforms like DALI, for instance, giving you those inspirations that you probably need. Similarly with ChatGPT, for a writer's block, essentially, you can go and get a lot of inspiration from there. And so I think it will aid in terms of coming up with more quality and better work from us. I think the frequency at which we can optimize campaigns and the frequency at which we can, the productivity rather could only increase. It might be artificial, but I think still there's still something called common sense, and I really want to believe that essentially is
That can't be generated by ChatGPT so far, but we don't know. But seriously, Vishal, are clients warming up to the use of AI for copy and creatives?
It's still early stages on that front, but I think because applications still haven't really been built, for creative professionals to leverage that for marketing and advertising purposes. But I think the future will hold that. So I'll just give you an example. If I'm a brand that's targeting multiple audience segments, then I can use generative AI to come up with creatives on a real-time basis, and target those audience segments on a real-time basis, right? So I think that to me is going to be the big differentiator, and a lot of brands want to see that happen very quickly. And so does the advertising fraternity. We're still a little while to get to that point, right? So it's going to take some time to get to that point, essentially.
Again, let's talk about the flip side of all of this. Now, do you envision legislation and regulations in India being modified to safeguard consumer privacy with the onslaught of all these technology services? And will there be a need for a body like ASCII that specifically guards consumer privacy and data privacy?
Yeah, I think that's necessary because as a consumer, I wouldn't want my data to kind of be used in ways and means which I'm not necessarily aware of or which I'm not given access to. So today there's a loophole in our system where that what we sign up as consent for advertising purposes can be misconstrued by a lot of the applications, and that can be then used by different, and that can be sold to third party providers and stuff without unnecessarily using our consent. I think and that's not correct. So I would say, in my personal view, I feel that there has to be a body that can regulate some of the ways in which data is being used, consumer data is being used, and put guidelines to each of these things to ensure that some of these applications don't necessarily cross the lines that they are currently doing today.
The final question is for the extremely attention challenged. Now, Vishal, your report has 23 trends, it has 7 sections. Suppose I ignore all of that and I want you to reduce it to just one thing. I'm a marketer. Tell me the one thing I need to know, Vishal, about this report.
Yeah, Suresh, that's a very difficult question, to be honest, because each marketer is trying to solve a different kind of problem. There'll be some marketer, for instance, who's trying to solve a problem around e-commerce, and to him, then e-commerce becomes a very critical element for his function. There'll be somebody else who'll be focusing on driving this performance marketing. So for him, how do I leverage Google and Facebook becomes really critical for them. So I'll not be able to pinpoint one specific point, but it really depends, and it will differ from person to person on what they're really trying to solve for. But the good news is that we've got most of it covered within the report. And
Fair
yeah.
enough. That's a fair answer. Right. Final question is a personal question. What one piece of technology are you personally excited about, Vishal? Is it a chip inside your body? Is it a flying Batman suit? What are you excited about?
So for me, the impact of generative AI on consumers and on advertising is a very critical one to watch out for in the next 1 year. So to be honest, that's what I'm going to be looking forward to.
All right. That brings us to the end of this interview. Vishal Jacob of Wavemaker, thank you very much for being part of Melt.
Thank you. Thanks, Suresh. Thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap on this episode. You can follow Melt on social media. The handle is Ready to Melt, or simply log on to readytomelt.com. If you'd like to follow me, I'm at Suvenk on Twitter. Till next week, goodbye and thanks for watching.